All right. Welcome to week 11, day 4 of India Evening and Weekend Platoon. So as I mentioned, we're going to start off by just doing a brief review of where things are at for our school API 5 that you guys worked on with Jordan and Guillermo a few days ago. And then we'll figure out how to transform that into school API 6. So I hope that my Docker compose that I ran a few minutes ago worked. So we're going to just go ahead and run this. So we're going to do a run server just so we can see where things are at. That's why. Okay, let's just delete that and try it again. Okay, perfect. So the server is running. I'm gonna open this in my browser and I'll share my screen and we can go see what stuff is happening at our localhost. Okay, so at localhost we've got a couple things. We have an admin panel, which I have not set up a super user for yet. We have our path for classes and our path for students. So if we were to go take a look at that path for students, we see that we can access our list of all the students. And this just puts everyone in our database. And it does a nice job of it. You know, it shows us the essential things that we might need to know, like their emails, their combinations. It also shows us the IDs of the classes that they're taking. So vice versa, we can kind of flip the script and go to all their classes. And we can see here that we have for each class, subject, professor, and then also a link back to the students. So one of the things that you guys that I'll ask you guys to do after we run through the basic part of School API 6 is, and I'm just going to jot this down in a note somewhere so I don't forget it, convert the ID numbers to proper string representations. So again, those 1, 2, 5, that's nice, in terms of in our database, but if we're just trying to generate a human readable output, I have no clue who student number 2 is. So maybe let's find a way to take the 1, 2, and 5 and turn it from the number to some other form of string. So yeah, this is just a brief refresher on where we were at as of end of day Thursday. So again, we can access all the students and all the classes. So okay, that's great. Let's go check out the assignments and just make sure that we were doing the right thing. So School API 5. CRUD API, build an endpoint that returns all the students. So we did that. And again, this is kind of what I was mentioning here of returning something that looks a little bit better than just returning the primary key. All right, and then we'll keep going. All classes, so the same thing. Perfect. Okay, so let's go check out what School API 6 needs us to do to build off of this. Oh, am I cutting out for anyone else?
Nope.
Okay, cool. If that does happen, let me know, because my computer is deciding to start running its fans rather loudly. Okay, so let's go find School API 6 to see what they want us to do. Okay, so build an API endpoint of this URL. Now, the difference is this one has a 1 at the end of it. So the old URL that we had just ended at students. The next one allows us to specify a particular student. In this case, it's just via ID, and that's all we're going to do in lecture. But after that, I will ask you guys to do it a slightly different way. And this is going to return a 404 response if there's no student matching this query, or it returns just the student with the following ID number that's tacked on to the end. And then we're going to do the exact same thing for classes. But again, for classes, I'm not going to have you guys do it by name. We're going to have you guys doing it by primary key. And then we have some tests. Okay, great. So let's figure out a plan of attack here. How are we going to do this? So this is school API. So what are let me open up the files that I think might be useful, some of which may or may not already be open. And I'm also going to stop running my server while I make my changes. I think that'll be easier. Okay, so let's see. What files do I probably need to modify for this? Well, probably going to need to modify the URL patterns, but I don't know where the URL patterns are coming from, so I'll probably need to go into my school project URLs as well, so that way we can figure out what the full paths are. I will need my views, because if I need to create a new API view, which is what the assignment seems to be saying, I'm going to need to modify some stuff in here. Shouldn't need my Docker file. And just in case, I'm just going to also pop open my models, just so I can see what stuff is in here. So we have our string function, and that should be good. Okay, so let's start off by understanding our URL paths versus the URL path / API endpoint that the assignment wants. So I'm going to copy the assignment text just into the URLs for now. So this is what they're telling us to do. So the pathway that they say is to do this whole thing /student/1. So right now, what is the base path for our URL? The base path is not blank, right? The base path is whatever's coming in from our Django URLs. So if we go up to here, and student app URLs, so this is our base path here. So I'm just going to write that down. So let's say base path into this, and then we we're going to tack on the localhost 8000 part to the start of it. So that URL is basically what's in the empty string. Now, the way that we need to modify this, according to the prompt, is by adding on the /1 at the end. Or, the easier way to say it is we're going to call this like an ID specifier to the end. So let's do that. So let's write in a new path for now. So the first thing that we're going to have to do is specify the route that we're going to add. So I'm just going to put that here. Say route view. I'm just going to use the all students view for now, just as a placeholder. And then we're going to give this thing a name. I'm going to call this route specific student. And I'm just going to add a note, route, and view are placeholders. Okay, so the first thing that we should do is do the route. So, based on the prompt here, What is this route going to be? Anyone have ideas? So if the base path route is blank, what needs to go here for us to get to this endpoint?
Maybe the student ID.
It
Can anyone hear him? You cut out your audio.
He cut out. Maybe all of a sudden I went fully deaf.
Minute coffee.
I was like, man, I really need some coffee. I just can't hear.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so Logan, as you were saying, we need some way to put the student ID in this path. So if I just say, hypothetically, ID slash, would that work?
Do you need to do the data type?
Okay,
Int,
so,
colon.
okay. So like that?
In the angle brackets.
In the angle brackets, yes. So this will allow me, by putting it in angle brackets, that basically means that this is a placeholder variable. If we didn't put that in the angle brackets, and we did what I said earlier of ID slash, then the path that we would go to is this base path slash just ID, like the word, which is not very helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in the slash. Okay, great. So that's a good route. Now the view here is also a placeholder. Before we start messing with the view, I just want to make sure that my route works. It's always a good check. Does my route work or is my code critically broken? So, you guessed it, we're going to go back to the browser. I'm going to spin up my server again. Okay, well, I just got an interesting error. So let's take a look at what this says. Down at the bottom, URL route cannot contain white space in angle brackets. Okay, so let me go ahead and remove the space that I put in. Let's try it again. Perfect. That looks like it worked. Let's go to all students. So if we look at the address bar, this is the old route that we tried. Right? So if I just go to localhost 8000 though, and alright, so let's go back to here. And let me just type in a number. Well, it certainly looks like our route worked, because it's sending it to all students, but it is saying that we have an unexpected keyword ID. So we can't use the old route that we wrote earlier. We're going to need to add in a new route, or a new view, to correspond to our new route. So let's do that. So let's go ahead first and stop running the server. So we've confirmed that our route works. Let's go ahead and add a new view. So let's call this view a specific student view. And it's going to call an API view. It's going to put pass in the middle. Now, so I don't make any mistakes later on, I'm going to import specific student immediately. And I'm going to also pop in specific student.asView in there. So now our view is no longer a placeholder. So let's go ahead and start actually coding this view. So the only type of function that we'll need in this view for now is just a get function, because all we're looking to do is just access whatever student is at the desired ID. So let's go ahead and add define get. We're going to add self request, and we're also going to add in the parameter for ID. Now you might ask yourself, where does the ID parameter come in? I'm not specifying that when I'm calling the function. The ID parameter comes in right here, where you specify it in your URL route. So if you specify in ID, the ID now gets passed to the view as a parameter. Hence the error that we were getting earlier when we tried passing this into all students as view. Because all students does not have an ID parameter. Specific student does. Alright, so what should our order of business be here? So I have an ID in my request. So what I need to figure out how to do is I'm going to need to figure out how to access student with the given ID, or I guess retrieve student with the given ID, student object, then serialize the student object, and then return serialized data as a response. Okay, so let's tackle this in the easy part first. So I'm gonna just pretend that that the student in question is just going to be like some blank student. Should do that for now as a placeholder for the retrieval. Once I've obtained student, hang on, I can just copy paste this stuff. So we can pop that down here, change query to student, and it's no longer many. Right, so this is just our serialized student, returning the data as a response. And we no longer need the pass. Cool. So we really need to work on this first part. Retrieve the student object with the given ID. How do I do that? How can I retrieve an individual student? Not all of the objects. I want to retrieve a specific object with the ID of ID. Any ideas? Where do I start? What commands do I need to run? Nicholas, any ideas?
Access
Get,
the
get
ID
object 404.
Alright, get object or 404. So Scott, walk me through that. How do I access this function?
It's get underscore object underscore.
Well, where do I pull it in from?
Oh, yeah, it's got to be, it's imported in through the REST framework.
Mhm.
Dot response.
Mm-hmm.
and then import response.
Okay.
And Django shortcuts. So from Django.shortcuts, import get underscore object underscore or underscore 404.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, great. So let's do that. So how do I use this function now that have imported it?
So you call it first.
So let's do that. So get object or 404.
And then a capital student
Yep.
to call the object. And then set your ID equals ID.
Yep. Do I need to put that in quotes or anything, or can I just say ID equals ID like that?
It's just like that.
Perfect. Yep, that's correct. So what get object or 404 lets us do, and thank you, Scott, for walking us through that, is it lets us do something that's quite nice. This is basically just putting a try and accept in one line. So what we just did there is essentially the equivalent of doing something like this, where I have a try, finding the student using get with this ID. If the student doesn't exist, it's going to throw a 404 error. In my case, I told it to throw a not found error. But these 4 lines, this 1 line, they do the exact same thing. So that's perfect. So we now have our get function written up. So let's go ahead and make sure that we have everything we need for right now. So we've got our specific student API view. It is returning a response. We have imported that, and we've hooked that up to our new route, which we checked works. So in theory, this should be okay. So let's go ahead and go back to my browser, bring that up here, restart that server. No errors, good. And let's try this. So if we go back to students, we have all the students. If I just wanted to say I try getting the first student, we just have student number 1. If I just want to do 2, okay, that looks like it's working. Now let's try a student whose ID does not exist. That's a very big ID number. And as we see here, we get an HTTP 404 saying not found, and it says no student matches the given query. So that's good. So we've successfully now been able to connect our new route based on taking an individual ID to cancel that in order to access an individual student instead of the full list of students. So we can do the exact same thing for classes, which is what we were, the other half of what we were tasked to do, right? So let's go ahead and just pull up our classes. So we're not needing that, don't need that, we need class app. So go to URLs and views. Let's put URLs here as well. And actually, why did I close up the student ones? What I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy paste exactly what we did in student, and I'm going to put that into classes. Because again, we are doing the exact same procedure, no changes. So we're going to create a specific class view, and we're going to add in this new path for ID. We're going to change this to be specific class, specific class. Let's go to views, and we are going to change this from specific student to specific class, 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 and I need to import getObject 404. So we'll bring that in from here. Again, we're just rinsing and repeating the exact same procedure that we just did for Django for the students. We're just recycling it for classes. And I'm just going to change this to class object. Change this to class. Okay, well, let's change this to specific class. That way, it's not going to throw a fit, because I can't use the variable name class. If I did, it thinks class is an actual Python class. So that all looks good. And let me just run the server one more time. Just to make sure that this works for classes as well. If we go back to my browser here, we've checked that this works for students. Let's see if now this might work for classes. If I want to get class number 1, we only get class number 1. We want to check class number 2. We only get class number 2. We want to check a class that doesn't exist. We got the 404 saying no class matches the query. So again, exact same procedure that we did for student. Just copy, paste, and change the names. It works for classes as well. So that is how we essentially will do School API 6. Questions, comments, concerns? Is this making sense? Okay. Okay, so again, welcome back to the second part of this morning's lecture. So we're going to be talking a little bit about using APIs in the backend. So specifically, we're going to be talking about how to bring in an API from the web, rope it into Django, but more specifically, how to do so safely and secure. So again, today's material is going to use the application at the end of day 6 branch. I'm going to Slack the link to today's curriculum. This is week 13, day 3. That link is sent out in the Slack for those of you who want to follow along. I'll just share my my console real quick. This is again going off the Pokemon example, just so you guys can see where we're at. So I cloned down the end of day 6 branch onto my local machine here. Just CD'd into it, created a virtual environment, installed the requirements.txt, opened up Docker, and then I made my migrations over here. So your standard process when you're cloning down something, that's Django. Started running my server, ran into a couple of errors after I made a super user. And then now I have we'll skip past all the errors. And then I just added a couple things, added a couple moves, added a couple Pokemons, and that is where we find ourselves now. So if we go to the browser here, and oh, I guess I need to run my server again. Come on. There we go, run server. Alright, I'll just refresh this. So, I just added 2 Pokemon. We've got a Charizard and a Pikachu in there. And I've got 2 moves, a Slam Dunk and a Kablam, just so we have something in our database so we can play around with that later. So, we have our Pokemon, we have our moves, but the next thing that we want to do is I want to bring in a Pokeball. So, like a cool little thing that I can store my Pokemon in and use them in Pokemon battles, and I haven't watched Pokemon in like 10 years, so that's about all I remember. But, in order to do that, I want to bring in some pictures of a Pokeball. So that the user has like a nifty little like reference that they can see when, for example, if I go to, let's see what I can do. Yeah, we can do like API, V1, nope, I can't type. Pokemon, this looks kind of ugly. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if we could figure out how to add some pictures or something in here? I think so. So let's figure out how to do that. The nice thing is that there is an API that we can use in order to look up clip art pictures. And this is something called the Noun Project. So the Noun Project allows you to make an account and set up an API. Now, the key thing here is you need to make an account to set up your API. Because, as it says here, their API can sometimes cost money. Especially if you use it, there's a free API plan and a pro API plan. So your free API plan lets you use up to 5,000 calls a month. If you pay money, you can use unlimited API calls per month. Because the Noun Project API, number 1 is tied to my account, but number 2 is also possibly tied to my bank account. It's pretty important that we don't let random people have access to my API keys that I use to access the API. Right? Like, for example, I made my account using a burner email address, so it's not a big deal. But let's say that I did actually set up a pro API plan and connect this to my credit card, and then I end up giving you guys my public and private API keys, and you guys make a lot more than 5,000 calls a month. Well, now my bill is going to be $500 a month. So we need to figure out a way to be able to use the API and have the API keys sent in my code, but also not publicize my API keys. So let's figure out how to do that. So anyway, once you guys make an account on the Noun Project, which again, you can do for free, you go to the developer side, and you create an API. I'm just calling this Charizard API, a random thing. I haven't made any API calls yet. And we'll see that it gives us 2 keys. So it gives you a public key and a private key, or a public key and a secret key. If we click how to use this thing, it says here that the API is secured with something called OAuth, and that you must use your client key and your secret key in order to make requests from this API. So I have to use both these keys somehow. Now, again, because this is not connected to anything personal, you guys can see the keys, obviously. So I'm going to just go ahead and copy these individually into a little notepad file. I'll just say public, and then I'm going to copy over my secret key as well. So now I just have those saved, and I don't need to see this. Well, actually, oh no, there is one other thing we should see, which is how the heck do I use the API? So if you go up to the top here, there's a little button that says API Explorer. And this allows you to essentially try out using the Noun Project's API, just like within your browser. So you don't need to use Postman, you don't need to use curl, but it's a nice little way to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and paste my API keys up at the top. And let's say that I want to look for an icon. I want to look for an icon by looking for a query. Let's say I want to look for a dog icon. I can try it out, and we see here that it returns a bunch of different icons, right? And each of these is kind of like an instance of our classes. And if I want to see what one of these icons looks like, I can go ahead and take this thumbnail URL, and we see here that that's the URL to get an icon of, I guess it's probably like a Shiba or some type of dog. Versus, I can scroll down and see that this leads to another type of dog. And if I hit that, we see that we get a different dog icon. But again, all of this is because I have connected my public key and my private key, my API key and my secret key to the API. And now, what this means for us, excuse me, is that these two keys need to be sent in through a header in our request via OAuth. So as it mentioned, I think, where did it say that? That we need to use OAuth. Yeah, how do I use this thing? So it says the API is secured with OAuth, so we need a way to connect our backend to OAuth to our API. So let's open up VS Code, wherever VS Code is. There we go. And let's figure out how we can do this. So I'm gonna go ahead and just make like a testing file, like a Scratch file. So let's say like scratch.py. It's good practice to establish like one random file dedicated in your project to just testing stuff out. And that's what we're going to do in this case. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is import the requests. Oh, here, let me stop running my server. You're going to want to import two modules. You're going to want to import the requests module in Python and the requests OAuth lib, aka requests via the OAuth platform libraries. And you want to do all of that within your virtual environment. So they'll install relatively quickly. And now let's just figure out how the heck we access something using OAuth. So we pip installed requests. So I'm going to just go ahead and import requests. I'm also going to bring in from requests OAuth lib, and I don't want the chat. Let me zoom in a little bit. I'm going to import OAuth1. Again, OAuth1 is the framework that our API uses in order to access, in order to authenticate the data. So one thing to keep in mind here as well, request is basically the same thing as fetch. Basically the same as fetch, but this is used on the back end for Python. So fetch, as you guys recall, is what we use a little bit with JavaScript, right? We're going to use requests for Python. Okay, so let's figure out how do we make a request? Does anyone remember from JavaScript, like what are the steps we have to go through? Okay, So if not, that's fine. So again, just think about this like you're doing it in Postman. There's a few things we have to do in Postman, right? So the things we need to do here is like setting up the request. We have to send the request. We have to process the request. Or process the response. So to set up the request, we have two things that need to go here. The first thing is going to be our headers. Second thing is going to be the content in the body. Right? So again, just think about this like we're doing it in Postman. We specify the headers, and then we specify the content that we're sending. Then we actually need to send the request, and then we need to process the request, which basically just means translate it into JSON. So in addition to the headers, we're also going to have to set up the authentication. Or if we want to be fancy and not use a whole word, we can just call it auth. So let's do that. So in order for us to set up auth, we're going to just create a new variable. And we're going to specify that this is an instance of OAuth1, so it signs the request using this protocol. And we see here that it says we need to specify our client key and our secret key. Now, this is great because I already have these things copy-pasted. So I'm getting a weird error here. So let's try to figure out why, or it's not an error, but why this is red. Answer is we need to put these in quotes. So we're going to specify that this is my client key, and then the next thing is my client secret key. So your public and your secret key are the two things that you need to make sure the authentication goes through successfully. So, all right, so we've got the headers. We also need to specify our URL endpoint. And our URL endpoint is, if we go back to the documentation, it's going to be this. I guess really the whole thing, right? So that your request URL is going to be the endpoint that we're going to. And that also goes in quotes again. And we don't really need anything in the body because that's kind of what goes in our query here. So let's go ahead and send this request. So in order to send a request, we need a variable to house the response. Again, this is the exact same thing that we used to do in JavaScript. So we're going to send the requests using requests.get, and the nice thing is it shows us here exactly what to do. So requests.get, and we're going to specify the URL is going to be the endpoint, and we don't have any parameters, but we're going to specify that the authentication is the OAuth1 authentication that I just set up. Once I get my response back, I'm just going to turn it into JSON. Response JSON is response.json, and we're just going to print response JSON. Okay, so this is the exact same process that we used to go through in JavaScript. We're not doing anything different, except now that we're adding in this one layer of authentication. So if I run this, I'll just use the keyboard shortcut here. We see that we do indeed get all of this JSON stuff. It's a lot. Let's say I don't want to see all of these results, and I just want to see, I don't know, the first one. So we can say response JSON. I think let's try, let me see what it's called. Okay, let's go all the way to the top. Okay, so it's called icons. We'll just do this, and we'll just say this is called icons. And we'll just do 0. We'll clear this. And now we just have the first result from our query. So let's hypothetically say that I wanted to try accessing this without any authentication. What might happen? Why is authentication necessary? So let's try it. So let's remove the auth and see what happens. Okay, well, we get an error. It says that it's expecting a value back for JSON. So we don't get anything. Let me print out the response directly and see what it gives us. Let's scroll up. Okay, we get a response 400 code. Does anyone know what a 400 code means? The answer, super simple. You can look this up in Google. You don't need to memorize it. But a 400 response, as it says here, is a bad request message. Why would we get back a bad request message when we don't have authentication? Because authentication is necessary in order to access whatever we're trying to access that's locked behind our API wall. So sometimes you do need authentication in order to access things. Hence why we have to go through the little song and dance with setting up the account and then getting the keys and sending the keys via OAuth 1, etc. So authentication, important. Does that make sense? Any questions about why we need authentication for this? Okay. Now, let's hypothetically say that I upload this code to GitHub. Because, I'm a developer, I want my project files to be released, be out there for the world to see, and, I'm adding this to my portfolio, etc. As it stands right now, is uploading this file a good idea? Or is there something I need to change before I upload it? Or something I should change? What do we think?
I don't know. Should we put it in get ignore? Somewhere that?
Well, we could put in this whole thing in the get ignore, but then this wouldn't get uploaded. So that might be a little bit of a problem.
Right.
Because the thing is, because this whole thing is all of our code. But Francis, why would we want to put this in the get ignore?
No. I'm just saying. I mean, since you're saying that if we really need it there, then we need to, I guess, push it, right?
Yep. Yeah, but your instinct about the get ignore is correct. But before I go on that, Logan, do you wanna say something?
Environment variables. We want to hide our secret key.
Yeah, we want to hide all this stuff, or at the very least, we want to hide the secret key. Because again, the secret key is what someone can use to start charging stuff to my API, or to the API on my bank account. I don't want the whole world to see that. So we need to figure out how to hide this. So the way to do that, as Francis was alluding to, is through the get ignore. And I think Yilang also mentioned in the chat the secret key and client key. All right. So Scott says secret into the environment file, call secret from the scratch.py, and add the env to the get ignore. Yep, that's perfect. So let's go ahead and just make a .env file. Now, we're going to put the .env file outside of everything, so just like the get ignore. And we need to set up a couple of environment variables. The first one that we're going to do is we're going to say that the environment for this is going to be a prod, or a production ready file. It's always a good thing to do, because usually you'll only add the environment file when you're pushing something to production. Now I'm going to copy this stuff and yeet it over into my environment file. And we're going to do a couple things. The first one is when we're defining environment variables, we don't need the quotes there. When you're defining an environment variable, you generally define it in all caps. That way you know it's not just a normal variable. So what I'll do here is I'll say something like noun key, and then noun secret key. Again, all caps. Because think about it. This looks very different from if I'm like writing a bunch of code, like we did in here, and from like a normal variable like response or response, JSON or endpoint, like all lowercase, bam, noun key. Like being in caps actually makes a really big difference. So if you have an important variable in your environment file, you got to call it something in capital letters, like generally speaking. So now I have this stuff in my .env file. We should probably add this to my gitignore. So let's do that. Because again, that way it's not going to get uploaded. But our code can still get uploaded. Okay, so Python can't really read .env files that easily on its own. We're going to need to install a package in order to allow it to do that. And the way that we can do that is we can install a package called python.env. Very convenient name. Wait for it to load. I'm going to do my pip list. And we see that it is listed. That's good. So we're going to now go back to here. We don't need the env file anymore. We don't need the gitignore. So let's go into here and let's figure out how we can bring in the noun key and noun key or noun secret key into this. So the first thing that we need to do is we probably need to import our .env, right? So we'll do a from .env, which is what it gets imported as. Import load.env, and it does two things. It parses the env file and then loads all of the variables in it as environment variables, aka that's something that Python can use. The second thing we need to do, we also need to import OS, or operating system. And we'll see why very shortly. So the first part of this is the load.env. Here, let's make some space. So I'm going to run load.env. And if we mouse over this, what does this do? It parses an env file and loads all the variables found as environment variables. Where do those environment variables live? They don't live in Python. Those environment variables live in the operating system. So we need to pull those in from the operating system, right? So, excuse me. So let's go ahead and just print out our OS environment variables. And let's go ahead and find one with the correct key. We don't need the models. Now I'm just forgetting what I called the environment variable a second ago. Probably check that. Let's bring in noun key. That's what we called it. And let's just comment all this out. And let's run this check just to make sure that our code actually works here. Okay, so we have noun key, and then if I say do the same thing for noun secret key, so both of those are stored correctly. Okay, easy. So let's now go ahead and uncomment all this and figure out how we can go about replacing these hard-coded values with what we just did. So the answer is nice and simple. Take that and replace the hard-coded key. Oopsies, that's not what I want to do. Oh god, alright, let's paste. There we go. And we're going to do the exact same thing down in our secret key. We're just going to change this to noun secret key. But yeah, all we're doing here is we're just swapping out those variables. So now, if I were to upload everything to GitHub, the .env file, this guy, does not have the noun key and the noun secret key uploaded to GitHub because those are included in our git ignore. So the only thing that I'm actually uploading is this scratch.py file that includes references to noun key and references to noun secret key. But it does not include the keys themselves, which essentially allows us, again, to safeguard our API access. And just to show you guys that this works and that I'm not trying to scam anyone, we'll hit run, and we see that indeed we get a 200 response back, and we get the link to our dog picture. Any questions about accessing resources using authentication APIs? Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, if you're going to cover this later, don't let me jump ahead. But so the application still needs the API keys, right? So
Yes.
it's stored in like a secret location on a different server, or where is that stored at for an actual production environment?
That's a good question. It really depends on how you set up your production environment. Most of the time, well, sometimes it will be stored in a completely separate location that you might need authentication to get through. Other times, it might just be stored in a .env file that's sitting co-located with everything on your server. Again, the main reason that we're using the .env file for today, and that you guys may use it in the future, is so that when you upload all of your code to GitHub or to some type of version control software, or send all of your code, for review, you're not exposing your environment variables directly. But usually, like those will have to live on some server, either yours server that's co-located with your code, or another one that you'll want to authenticate to get to as well. Yeah, that's a great question. Any others before we start figuring out how to actually make use of this?
I had a question real quick about where you found the URL for like your API on specifically on the Noun app, the Noun project.
That is a great question. So let's take a look. Okay, so if you start out on the Noun project, like the developer page here, like after you make it, you go to the API Explorer, which is over here. You put in your keys, go down to where the command you want to run. In this case, we did the get one. Hit try it out, and then it gives you the request URL that you can copy paste.
Perfect. Thanks.
Most APIs will not have something like this, like an API Explorer. We can try it. So you'll have to sometimes go through the documentation. So if you take a look here, let's go API documentation, icon, and then here they have this example of a GET request that you could run, which is great, really nice to see. And you'll see that it's the exact same format. So yeah, documentation is your friend. Any other questions? Okay, so instead of running this query on a dog, we're going to want to bring in some Pokeballs. Because again, why do we have dogs and Pokemon? That's not the TV show. We're going to bring in some Pokeballs to capture and fight with our Pokemon. So we're going to just change this to an Ultra Ball for now. So I have that, and I'm just going to keep my scratch.py file in here so I can use it later. I'm going to make sure my Docker is in use. Yep, Docker is running. And let's figure out how to operationalize the stuff that we just did. So I want to make a new app. I want to make a new app for my Pokeballs. Can anyone remind me how I spin up a new app in Django?
Start app and add it to your what is it, settings.py.
Yep, perfect. Start app. Oh, I forgot to actually give it a name. Yeah, that will probably do it. Let's call this like Pokeball app. Okay, so it says it's added. Let's go back to my VS Code. Okay, we have a Pokeball app now, so that's good. And then I need to add this to my settings.py as well. So also, as you see here, one thing to mention, Django also generates a Django secret key. You should typically, if you're going to send this to production, send this to your environment, your .env file, so it can be used as an environment variable as well. Same procedure. So anyway, so let's add in the Pokeball app in there. Perfect. And here, let's actually just add in the Django secret key now. I'll just call this. I guess we'll just call it secret key. Okay, that's fine. And then hypothetically speaking, if we wanted to, again, bring in the secret key, all we would have to just do the exact same thing that we did in our scratch env file, right? So we'll just do copy paste this stuff in here, and I'm just going to call this, where is my .env? I'll just call this the Django secret key, because we might have a lot of secret keys. So we're going to close out of that, and copy paste this code, and we'll now say instead of secret key being all this stuff, we can now say that it's going to be the Django secret key, and we no longer need this there. So again, it's just like adding one layer of security to your application. Okay, so you added our secret keys, created our app, installed the .env file, and now we're going to just add in some code to our Pokeball app. So we're not going to add in any models to the Pokeball right now, but I am going to create a file called converters.py. You might ask, well, what are we going to convert? And that is a great question. So I'm going to copy paste some code in, and again, this is just the same code from today's example, and we're going to talk through it and see what it does. So let's figure out what this piece of code does. So we're creating a class called a ball type converter, and it does a string conversion. It takes in these 4 types of allowed balls, and it has this toPython function that takes in some value and checks if the value in lowercase is not in there. We're going to give an error, or we're going to return it in lowercase. So one thing that you guys might notice is that this ball type converter here reads very similarly to a converter that we might have seen, I don't know, like half an hour ago? You guys remember that int or string converter that we saw earlier? That we imported to create this register converter for Django. This new converter that we made for Pokeballs is just a custom version of the int or string, of something like the int or string converter. It's customized for our purposes. It's kind of like where you generate a custom serializer for classes or for students instead of using the default Django serializer. It's exactly the same thing. We're just customizing it a little bit further. So what this converter specifically does, we can specify it up here, is checks, is the input a valid type of Pokeball or not? That's all this does. Just a fancy way of checking what type of input we're generating. So, okay, that's nice. Why do we want to do this? The easy answer is, well, we want this API that we're creating in Django, I want it to be able to display or output information about our Pokeballs. So let's go ahead and add in a URL pathway. Let's do a urls.py, and I'm just gonna, for convenience sake, so I don't have to go and re-import everything, I'm just gonna copy over the Pokemon app urls.py and paste it in here. I know it's not the same, but we're just doing it for convenience sake. So I'm not going to import this stuff. We just import something, and then this is a great reminder that I need to put some stuff in my views, and I don't need to register the int or string converter because that's not one of my converters. This time my converter is the ball type converter. So replace, and we'll just say that this is like ball type. And we need to add in some URL patterns. So what we want the Pokeball app to do is I want to be able to input some type of Pokeball type. I'm just going to call this Pokeball. And I want this to display the selected Pokeball. I do not want it to display all Pokeballs, just the specific one that I'm interested in. And we'll just call this selected Pokeball. And this should probably be a type of view that we design. So let's figure out how to do that. So again, all I'm doing here is we're just setting up the URLs. That there's nothing more to it. All I'm saying is, hey, I want to create a custom URL for my app that when I access this pathway, it'll just give me a picture of the Pokeball of this specific ball type as defined in converters.py, right, with the 4 allowed ball types. So let's go to our views and let's add some stuff. So we're going to do this using Django REST framework instead of doing this the boring old school Django way. So I'm just going to copy paste all of my views from Pokemon app again because it's a great template. Like we might as well do it. And let's start editing this heavily. Number 1, I don't need all Pokemon. So that gets yeeted and deleted out. I also don't need to serialize things anymore. And I don't have any models, so I'm not going to import any models in there. We do need JSON, but now, let's see, what stuff do I not need? I don't need the settings. I don't need converters. I'll keep URLs open, but I'm going to copy paste the stuff from my scratch.py and bring some of this in as well. I'm just going to bring all of this in. So the first thing is I don't need selected Pokemon. What did I call this thing? I called it selected Pokeball. Let's do that. And instead of ID, I called the parameter ball. Specify that here. And let's just remove all of this stuff in the middle. Let's do a pass. Okay, so what's going on? Well, when the user goes to this URL pattern, we are going to get the information of the type of Pokeball that they are accessing. What I want to do is I want to be able to get that Pokeball thumbnail from the API and spin that out. So let's write that down. So the first thing that we want to do is, so we know that our Pokeball, there we go. We know that our Pokeball type has now been verified as a Pokeball, right? So it's not just a random string. So now that we know that we have a Pokeball, I need to be able to grab the correct URL endpoint corresponding to my desired Pokeball. Then I need to send API request to my API, or send a request to my API to retrieve the response containing the image of my Pokeball. Then I need to process response to retrieve the link to the image of my Pokeball. And then I'm going to return the link. That's it. So let's start off with step 1. Grab the correct URL endpoint corresponding to my desired Pokeball. Now I'm going to go ahead and just split screen this real quick. And let's go ahead and minimize that a little bit. Hopefully this isn't too confusing to look at. The reason I'm doing this is because I want us to look at that scratch.py file and start bringing over the things that we need into our views. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bring over our endpoint. Now, I want to get the correct URL endpoint corresponding to my desired Pokeball, which is the parameter ball. So we're going to turn this into an F string and replace Ultra Ball with whatever the user has specified. Either Ultra Ball or Pokeball or one of the other ones. Okay, I have my endpoint. Now I need to send a request to my API to retrieve the response. Well, we already know how to do that. That's exactly what we did up here. So we have our auth header, right? And we can just import our keys because we imported OS and we have access to our environment variables. We don't have a body, so I'm going to send my request and get back some response. Now I need to process the response, so I'm going to turn it into JSON. And real quick, I'm just going to run the Python file because I forgot how to get the link to my URL. So this is for the entire Pokeball. Again, I'm just running this just so I can see what my response comes back. So what I need to do is I need to figure out how to access this this thumbnail URL. So let's figure out how to do that. So number one, so let's go to icons. So we'll say icon link is going to be, so I'm going to copy this. So we're just going to get the first result. And then from the first result, we're going to get, I think this is called thumbnail URL. And that needs to go in quotes. Okay. And now I need to return the link. So, hypothetically, I could just return the link, like icon link, like so. But this is wrong. Because selected Pokeball is an API view. Does anyone remember what an API view has to return? I'll give you a hint. If we take a look at one of the other apps, like its API view, what thing are we returning here?
The JSON view
We are returning JSON,
or
but more
serialized?
specifically, we are serialized. More specifically, we're just returning a response. So we're returning a response. We're not just returning like a random string. So what we need to do in our views here is we also need to return a response. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's return a response. And specifically, when we're returning a response here is generally some type of JSON. So JSON is, again, key value pairs. So let's just make some key value pairs. So let's call this one thumbnail is the key, and then the value is going to be the link. So now our return statement is in the correct format of being a response. So an interesting thing here that is good for you guys to keep in mind, this view is not related to any models, right? Our models file is blank. The only thing this view does is it takes in an input from the user on the path, converts that into an input going to our API endpoint, takes in our keys to send the request to the API endpoint, gets back a response, processes that to get a URL, and then returns a response with that URL. That's all we're doing. So there's one more thing that we need to do before we can fully test this out. So we added the views.py, we added our selected Pokeball view to our urls.py here. And we added our Pokeball app to our installed apps. The one thing we forgot to do is add our Pokeball app to our project URLs. So that's the last thing that you always want to make sure you're doing. And we can just copy paste what we did for moves. That's not what I copy pasted. There we go. And we're just going to replace this, and we're going to call it Pokeballs. We're going to call this Pokeball. Now we are fully spun up and ready to test this out. So let's see what happens if we go to Django Pokeball example. I am not going to start my app. I would like to run my server. And let's take a look at what we have. So let's go to my browser. I just open up localhost 8000. We see that Pokeballs is listed, so that's a good sign. So let's visit our API endpoint. And it says we need to specify a ball type. So what are these allowed ball types that we specified in our converters? Pokeball. Pokeball is a valid ball type. So let's put that in here. And we see that we get a link to this thumbnail. And if I click it, we get the thumbnail for a Pokeball. Okay, let's try it for one of the other ones. Let's try this for a Master Ball. So I'll do Master Ball. We get a different link. And that gives us, I guess this is a Master Ball. So, not to belabor the point, but you see how we were able to link to a secured third-party API through authentication, but also how to hide our method of access with our keys from random people who might see our project on GitHub through that .env file and through the .gitignore. And then lastly, we also got a little bit further into converters here and talked about how those converters can be used when we're connecting to our URLs and our views. Any questions?
Can you show me again those links where the images are coming from? Just a
Sure.
really quick review.
Yeah, so all the links are just coming from the the responses that we're outputting. Right? So again, if we just go to this is just what we set up, is if you go to Pokeballs generally, and here we should put a slash. That's not what I wanted to do. There we go. And we need to specify the type of Pokeball that's being accessed. So if we say Pokeball, that's not what I wanted to do, and I have no idea where it pulled that up from. Let's see, Pokeball. We see that we get the link to the Pokeball thumbnail. That's just what we set up via our API. Whereas if I just try something like Random Ball, which does not exist, we see that it gives us a page not found 404 error, which is exactly what we wanted, because that's what we set up via our converter. Any other questions about this? Then all we're doing is we're just combining our usage of the Django REST framework that you guys know how to use now with our new tool of environment variables. Nothing more to it. Okay, if there's no questions, then